The rain fell over Manhattan like a confession no one wanted to hear. It streaked down the tall windows of the Corsetti mansion, blurring the city lights into smears of gold and white. And Elena stood watching it, with the stillness of a woman who had learned decades ago that movement invited attention, and attention in this house was rarely a blessing. She was 53 years old, and she had been Salvatore Corsetti's wife for 30 of those years. 30 years of silence. 30 years of watching men enter this house with fear in their eyes and leave with gratitude or not leave at all. 30 years of sleeping beside a man whose hands had signed death warrants over breakfast and whose lips had kissed her forehead each night as though she were a child who needed soothing rather than a woman who needed truth. Elena had been beautiful once, and perhaps she still was, though she had stopped looking at herself in mirrors the way other women did. Her hair was silver now, swept back from a face that time had touched with the kind of elegance that comes from suffering worn gracefully. Her eyes were dark, almost black, and they held depths that Salvatore had never bothered to explore. He had married her for her father's connections, for the alliance her bloodline promised, and he had kept her for the image she provided. The faithful wife, the silent partner, the ornament that proved even monsters could be loved. But Elena had never loved Salvatore Corsetti. She had feared him, respected him, even admired the brutal efficiency with which he had built his empire. But love was a word that had died in her mouth somewhere around their 5th anniversary, when she had first understood that the man she had married was not capable of receiving it or giving it. Salvatore loved power. He loved money. He loved the sound of his own name spoken with reverence by men who would kill for him or be killed by him. Everything else, including his wife, was merely furniture in the grand house of his ambition. The grandfather clock in the corner of the study struck 11, and Elena turned from the window. The house was quiet tonight, which was unusual. Most evenings there were men in the downstairs parlor, soldiers and capos who came to pay their respects or receive their orders. There were phone calls at all hours, the coded language of the underworld flowing through these walls like blood through veins. But tonight, Salvatore had dismissed everyone early. He had told her he had business in the city, a meeting that could not wait, and he had left in the back of his black sedan with 2 of his bodyguards flanking him like shadows. Elena had not asked where he was going. She had learned long ago that questions were unwelcome in this marriage. But tonight, something had shifted in her chest. A weight that had been building for months without her conscious acknowledgement. She had seen the way Salvatore looked at his phone when he thought she was not watching. She had noticed the new cologne he wore, something younger and sharper than the scent he had favored for decades. She had observed the extra care he took with his appearance before these mysterious evening meetings, the way he checked his reflection with a vanity he had never displayed for her. Elena was not a fool. She had survived 30 years in this world precisely because she understood what was not said more clearly than what was. And what was not being said now was loud enough to shake the foundations of everything she had endured. She crossed the study to Salvatore's desk, a massive thing of dark mahogany that had belonged to his father before him. The surface was clean, as always, because Salvatore trusted no one with his papers and kept everything of importance locked in the safe behind the portrait of his mother. But his laptop sat open, the screen dark, and Elena knew the password because she had watched him enter it 100 times from the corner of her eye. Salvatore believed she was not paying attention. He believed she was decorative and passive, a woman who had accepted her role and would never dare to peek behind the curtain. This was his greatest mistake. And it was a mistake Elena had cultivated carefully, playing the part he expected while her mind remained sharp and watchful. She sat in his chair, feeling the leather creak beneath her weight, and she opened the laptop. The screen glowed to life, and she entered the password with fingers that did not tremble. She had been married to a monster for 3 decades. She had learned to control her fear, to keep it caged somewhere deep where it could not betray her. The email was open on his screen, and Elena read it with the detachment of a woman who had always known this day would come. The messages were not explicit, not at first glance, but they did not need to be. The language of infidelity is universal, written in the spaces between words, in the private jokes and the careful scheduling and the hunger that bleeds through even the most cautious correspondence. Her name was Vivian Mercer, the wife of Marcus Mercer, a name Elena knew only in whispers, a man who worked for the Castellano family, and whose reputation was spoken of in tones usually reserved for natural disasters. Marcus Mercer was a fixer, the kind of man who made problems disappear so completely that even God could not find them. He had been in the shadows of this world for as long as Elena could remember, a figure of legend and nightmare, and his wife was sleeping with Salvatore Corsetti. Elena read the messages slowly, absorbing every word, every date, every confirmation of what she had suspected. The affair had been going on for nearly 2 years, 2 years of secret meetings in hotel rooms that cost more per night than most families earned in a month. 2 years of lies told to both spouses, of stolen hours and whispered promises. Salvatore, who trusted no one, who saw betrayal in every shadow, had been fool enough to believe that his own betrayals would never come to light. She closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of the study, listening to the rain and feeling something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest. It was not heartbreak. Her heart had been broken so many times by this man that the pieces no longer fit together in any recognizable shape. What she felt now was something else, something that had been dormant for 30 years and was finally waking up. It was rage, pure, clarifying, magnificent rage. Elena rose from the chair and walked to the window again, watching the city lights blur through the rain. She thought about all the years she had given to this man, all the dignity she had sacrificed, all the dreams she had buried in the garden of her own silence. She thought about the daughter they had lost, the miscarriage that Salvatore had barely acknowledged before returning to his business. She thought about the funeral she had attended alone because he had a meeting more important than her grief. She thought about every Christmas dinner where his soldiers mattered more than his wife, every anniversary forgotten, every touch that felt like an obligation rather than an expression of love. And now this, now Vivian Mercer, 30 years younger than Elena, with her designer clothes and her perfect smile, and her husband who could make men vanish from the face of the earth. Salvatore had finally given Elena something she could use, something that could shatter his carefully constructed world if she chose to wield it. The question was whether she was brave enough, and Elena realized, standing there in the darkness, that bravery had nothing to do with it. She was not brave. She was tired. She was finished. And she was done being the silent ornament in Salvatore Corsetti's empire. The next morning, Elena dressed with more care than she had in years. She chose a black dress, simple and elegant, and she wore the diamond necklace Salvatore had given her on their 25th anniversary, a gift she had always suspected was purchased with blood money and guilt. She looked at herself in the mirror, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she saw someone looking back. Not the wife of a Don, not the silent partner, just Elena, a woman who had finally found a reason to stop being invisible. Salvatore was at breakfast when she came downstairs, reading the newspaper and drinking his espresso with the casual arrogance of a man who believed the world existed to serve him. He barely glanced up when she entered, offering a grunt of acknowledgement that might have been a greeting or might have been dismissal. After 30 years, Elena could no longer tell the difference. She sat across from him and poured herself coffee, watching him over the rim of her cup. He was still handsome, she supposed, in the way that predators are handsome, all sharp edges and controlled power. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes that had not been there when they married. But he wore his age like a crown, a testament to his survival in a world that killed most men before they reached 50. Elena wondered what Vivian Mercer saw when she looked at him. Youth, power, escape from her own marriage? Or perhaps she saw what Elena had once seen, before the years had stripped away her illusions. Perhaps she saw a man who could make her feel important, who could make her feel desired. And perhaps she did not yet understand that Salvatore Corsetti's desire was a trap that closed slowly, so slowly that you did not realize you were caught until it was far too late. "Salvatore," she said, and her voice was calm. the voice of a woman who had rehearsed this moment in her mind for hours before dawn. "I want a divorce." He looked up from his newspaper, and for a moment something flickered in his eyes that might have been surprise. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold calculation that was his natural state. He set down his cup and studied her with the attention he might give a business rival who had just made an unexpected move. "A divorce," he repeated, and there was no emotion in his voice, only the careful neutrality of a man assessing a situation. "And what brought this on?" Elena met his gaze without flinching. 30 years, she said. 30 years of being your wife, and having nothing to show for it except this house and these diamonds, and the knowledge that I have wasted my life on a man who does not know how to love anything except power. I am done, Salvatore. I want out." He leaned back in his chair, and a small smile curved his lips, the smile of a man who found amusement in the struggles of lesser beings. "You want out," he said. "And where would you go, Elena? What would you do? You have no money of your own, no family left, no skills beyond hosting dinner parties and looking decorative at funerals. You are nothing without me, and we both know it." The words should have hurt, but they did not. Elena had heard versions of this speech 1,000 times, in 1,000 different ways, and she had long ago stopped letting his cruelty penetrate her armor. "Perhaps that is true," she said. "Perhaps I am nothing, but I would rather be nothing on my own than something that belongs to you." Salvatore's smile faded, and something darker took its place. "You are being dramatic," he said. "Whatever has upset you, we can discuss it like civilized people, but a divorce is out of the question. I have a reputation to maintain. A divorce would make me look weak, and I do not tolerate weakness." Elena rose from the table, and she was surprised to find that her hands were steady. "Then I suppose you will have to learn," she said. "Because I am not asking for your permission, Salvatore. I am telling you what is going to happen. I have already contacted a lawyer. The papers will be delivered by the end of the week." She turned to leave, and his voice followed her, cold and sharp as a blade. "Elena, if you do this, you will regret it. I promise you that." She paused at the doorway, and she looked back at him with eyes that held 30 years of accumulated pain. "I have regretted every day of this marriage," she said. "Whatever comes next cannot possibly be worse." She walked out of the room, and she did not look back. Behind her, she heard the sound of his fist hitting the table, the crash of porcelain as his cup shattered against the wall. But Elena kept walking, up the stairs and into her bedroom, where she locked the door and finally allowed herself to breathe. She had done it. She had taken the first step, and now there was no turning back. The days that followed were tense and silent. The mansion transformed into a battlefield where the weapons were glances and the casualties were words unspoken. Salvatore retreated into his study, conducting his business behind closed doors, and Elena felt his rage radiating through the walls like heat from a furnace. He had not spoken to her since breakfast that morning, but she knew he was planning something. Salvatore Corsetti did not accept defiance. He crushed it, slowly and methodically, until nothing remained but submission and regret. But Elena had her own plans now, plans that had been taking shape in her mind since the moment she read those emails. She knew things about Salvatore that no one else knew, secrets he had whispered in the darkness of their bedroom, trusting that she would never have the courage or the opportunity to use them against him. She knew about the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the money that flowed through channels so hidden that even his own consigliere did not know their full extent. She knew about the bodies, the betrayals, the deals made with men who would destroy him if they ever learned the truth. And she knew about Vivian Mercer, which meant she knew about Marcus Mercer. And that knowledge was perhaps the most valuable weapon of all. Elena had never met Marcus Mercer, but she had heard the stories. Everyone in their world had heard the stories. He was the man you called when a problem needed to disappear completely, when even the memory of its existence needed to be erased. He had worked for the Castellano family for over 20 years, and in all that time, Not a single job had ever been traced back to him. He was a ghost who left no footprints, a shadow that devoured shadows, and his loyalty to the Castellanos was legendary. But loyalty, Elena knew, had its limits, and a man whose wife had been sleeping with another Don for 2 years might find those limits tested beyond endurance. She found Marcus Mercer's information through careful research, using a computer at the public library, rather than anything in the house that Salvatore might monitor. It took her 3 days to locate an address, a phone number, a way to reach a man who had spent his entire career being unreachable. And when she finally had what she needed, she sat in her car outside the library and stared at the piece of paper in her hands, understanding that what she was about to do could not be undone. She was about to betray her husband to a man who could destroy him. She was about to form an alliance with the enemy, to share secrets that could bring down the entire Corsetti empire. And she was doing it not because she wanted power or money or revenge, but because she wanted to be free. She wanted to walk away from this life with enough to start over, to find out who Elena might have been if she had never married Salvatore Corsetti. She picked up her phone and dialed the number. It rang 3 times before a voice answered, deep and measured, the voice of a man who was accustomed to receiving calls that changed the course of lives. "This is Mercer," the voice said, and Elena felt a chill run down her spine despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. "Mr. Mercer," she said, and her voice did not waver. "My name is Elena Corsetti. I believe we have something to discuss." There was a long pause, so long that Elena wondered if he had hung up. Then the voice returned, and there was something different in it now, something that might have been interest or might have been danger. "Mrs. Corsetti," he said. "I have been expecting your call." Elena's breath caught in her throat. "You have." Another pause, and when he spoke again, she could hear the cold smile in his words. "I know about my wife and your husband, Mrs. Corsetti. I have known for some time. The question is not whether we have something to discuss, but whether you have the courage to discuss it. Meet me tomorrow at noon. There is a cafe on the corner of Bleecker and Sullivan. Come alone, and do not tell anyone where you are going. If I suspect you are being followed or monitored, you will never see me. And this conversation will never have happened." The line went dead, and Elena sat in her car, staring at the phone in her hands. Marcus Mercer had been expecting her call. He already knew about the affair, which meant he had been watching, waiting, gathering information just as she had been. And now they were going to meet. 2 betrayed spouses united by a common enemy. And Elena understood that she had just stepped into a game far more dangerous than anything she had experienced in 30 years of marriage to a Don. But she was not afraid. For the first time in decades, Elena Corsetti was not afraid. She was alive with purpose, burning with a fire that Salvatore had never managed to extinguish, and she was ready to watch his empire crumble. Tomorrow, she would meet Marcus Mercer. Tomorrow she would begin the work of destroying her husband, and tomorrow, for the first time in her life, she would stop being a victim and become something else entirely. She started the car and drove home, and the city lights blurred past her windows like the years of her wasted life, fading into memory as she raced toward a future she could finally choose for herself. The cafe on the corner of Bleecker and Sullivan was the kind of place that existed between worlds. It was old enough to have history, but modest enough to avoid attention, with mismatched chairs and tables that had seen decades of conversations whispered over coffee cups and untouched pastries. Elena arrived 15 minutes early, wearing sunglasses and a scarf that obscured most of her face, feeling like a character in a film noir rather than a woman meeting a stranger to plot her husband's destruction. She chose a table in the back corner, where she could see the door and the windows and anyone who might be watching from the street. 30 years of marriage to Salvatore had taught her the value of strategic positioning, of always knowing where the exits were and who might be blocking them. She ordered an espresso she did not intend to drink and waited, her hands folded on the table like a woman at prayer. Marcus Mercer arrived at exactly noon, and Elena knew it was him the moment he walked through the door. He was not what she had expected. The stories painted him as a monster, a creature of shadows and silence. But the man who crossed the cafe toward her table looked almost ordinary. He was tall and lean, with silver hair cut short and precise, and he wore a dark suit that was expensive without being ostentatious. His face was weathered but not unkind, the face of a man who had seen too much and learned to carry it quietly. Only his eyes betrayed the truth of what he was, pale gray and utterly still, like the surface of a frozen lake that concealed depths no one could measure. He sat across from her without greeting, ordering nothing, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other. Two strangers bound by the infidelity of their spouses, two people who had every reason to distrust each other, and no one else to trust instead. "Mrs. Corsetti," he said finally, and his voice was the same as it had been on the phone, deep and measured, revealing nothing. "I appreciate you coming." Elena removed her sunglasses and met his gaze. "Mr. Mercer, I was not sure you would be here." A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "I am always where I need to be," he said. "It is the nature of my work. But I admit I did not expect to be sitting across from the wife of Salvatore Corsetti discussing our mutual betrayal. Life has a way of surprising even those of us who believe we have seen everything." Elena studied him, searching for some sign of the violence that his reputation promised. She found none. He seemed calm, almost peaceful, like a man who had made his decisions long ago and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. "How long have you known?" she asked. "About your wife and my husband?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, considering the question. 14 months, he said. "I discovered the affair 6 months after it began. My wife is not as careful as she believes herself to be, and I have spent my entire career noticing things that others wish to remain hidden." 14 months, Elena repeated. "And you did nothing?" "I waited," Marcus said simply. "In my line of work, patience is everything. Acting on emotion is how men get caught, how empires fall, how mistakes become permanent. I gathered information, I documented everything. I watched and listened and learned. And I waited for the right moment to act." Elena felt a chill run down her spine, not from fear but from recognition. She had done the same thing in her own way. She had endured 30 years of marriage to a man who did not love her, waiting for something she could not name, and now that moment had finally arrived. "What changed?" she asked. "Why is now the right moment?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, and something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of pain quickly suppressed. 3 weeks ago, my wife told me she was leaving, he said. She said she had fallen in love with someone else, a man who could give her the life she deserved. She did not tell me who, of course. She believed I was oblivious, that I had spent so many years focused on my work, that I had failed to notice her slipping away. She asked for a divorce, and she asked for half of everything I own, and she smiled at me as though I were a stranger she had finally found the courage to dismiss. Elena watched his face, searching for the rage she expected to find there. But Marcus Mercer's expression remained calm, almost serene, and that frightened her more than any display of anger could have. "And what did you say?" she asked. "I told her I would consider it," Marcus replied. "I told her these things take time, that we should discuss the details carefully. She believed me, because she wanted to believe me. Because it was easier than imagining that her husband might already know the truth. She went back to her lover's bed that same night, and she did not notice that I had already begun to take everything from her." Elena's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Marcus reached into his jacket and withdrew a slim folder, which he placed on the table between them. "This is a summary," he said. "The full documentation is in a secure location that only I can access. But this will give you an idea of what I've been doing for the past 14 months. Elena opened the folder, and what she saw made her heart stop. There were photographs, dozens of them, showing Vivian Mercer and Salvatore Corsetti in hotel rooms, in restaurants, in the back seats of cars. There were transcripts of phone calls, records of financial transactions, evidence of gifts given and received. There were dates and times and locations, a complete chronicle of a 2-year affair documented with the precision of a forensic investigation. But that was not what shocked her. What shocked her were the additional documents, the ones that had nothing to do with the affair. There were bank statements showing money flowing from Corsetti accounts into offshore holdings. There were records of shell companies that Elena recognized from her own midnight research. There were names and numbers and connections that painted a picture of Salvatore's empire in devastating detail, evidence that could destroy not just his marriage, but his entire organization. "How did you get this?" she whispered, and her voice was barely audible. Marcus smiled, and for the first time Elena saw something cold and sharp behind his eyes. "I am a fixer, Mrs. Corsetti. I make problems disappear. But to make something disappear, you must first understand it completely. I have spent 20 years learning how men like your husband operate, where they hide their secrets, how they protect themselves from the consequences of their actions. When I decided to investigate my wife's affair, I discovered that her lover was one of the most powerful men in the city, and I realized that if I wanted to protect myself, I needed to know everything about him." Elena closed the folder, her mind racing. "You have been planning this," she said, "not just revenge for the affair. You have been planning to bring down Salvatore entirely." "I have been preparing for the possibility," Marcus corrected. "There is a difference. I did not know what you would do, Mrs. Corsetti. I did not know if you would discover the affair, or if you would care, or if you would have the courage to act. But when I received your call yesterday, I knew that the moment had finally arrived. You and I want the same thing. We want to be free of our spouses, and we want them to pay for what they have done. The question is whether you are willing to do what is necessary to make that happen." Elena looked at him across the table. This man who made bodies vanish and secrets disappear. This legend of the underworld who sat before her like a business partner proposing a merger. She should have been terrified. She should have run from this cafe and never looked back, returning to her gilded cage and her silent suffering and the safety of familiar misery. But Elena Corsetti had spent 30 years being afraid, and she had finally discovered that fear was just another kind of prison. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. Marcus leaned forward, and his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Your husband has approximately $170 million in liquid assets," he said. "This does not include his properties, his businesses, his legitimate holdings. This is money that exists in the shadows, money that no government knows about, money that he has accumulated through decades of criminal enterprise. I know where it is. I know how to access it, and I know how to transfer it without leaving a trace." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "You want to steal from Salvatore Corsetti?" "I want to redistribute his assets," Marcus said. And there was ice in his voice now, the cold efficiency of a man who had calculated every angle. "I want to take $100 million and put it somewhere he can never reach it. I want to leave him with nothing but his name and his reputation, both of which will be worthless once certain information reaches certain people. And I want to do this in a way that ensures he can never retaliate, because by the time he realizes what has happened, he will have far bigger problems than a missing fortune." Elena's hands were trembling now, and she gripped the edge of the table to steady them. "And what do you want from me?" "I need access," Marcus said. "I have gathered everything I can from the outside, but there are pieces missing, pieces that only someone inside the Corsetti household could provide. Account numbers, passwords, the location of his private safe, the names of the people he trusts most, and more importantly, the names of those he has betrayed. I need you to be my eyes and ears inside his world, Mrs. Corsetti, and in exchange, I will give you exactly what you want." Elena stared at him. "And what is that?" "Freedom," Marcus said simply. "Financial security, a new life somewhere far from here, where Salvatore Corsetti's name means nothing, and his reach cannot touch you. I will give you half of everything I take from him. $50 million, deposited in accounts that only you control, in countries that have no extradition treaties and no interest in the affairs of American criminals. I will give you the resources to disappear completely, to become someone new, to live the rest of your life on your own terms." The offer hung in the air between them, vast and impossible and terrifying. Elena thought about what he was asking her to do. He was asking her to betray her husband, to steal from him, to participate in his destruction. He was asking her to trust a man she had just met, a man whose profession was making people vanish, a man who had every reason to use her and discard her once he had what he wanted. But then she thought about the alternative. She thought about returning to the mansion, to the silence and the fear and the endless waiting. She thought about Salvatore's smile, the one that promised pain without ever speaking its name. She thought about spending the rest of her life as an ornament, a possession, a footnote in the story of a man who had never loved her. And she thought about Vivian Mercer, 30 years younger and beautiful and sleeping with her husband. And she felt the rage crystallize in her chest like ice forming over still water. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, and her voice was steady now, the voice of a woman who had made her decision and was simply clarifying the terms. "How do I know you will not take everything and disappear, leaving me to face Salvatore's wrath alone?" Marcus reached across the table and took her hand, and his grip was firm, but not threatening. "Because I am not a thief, Mrs. Corsetti," he said. "I am a man who solves problems, and right now, you and I have the same problem. We are both trapped in marriages with people who have betrayed us, and we both want to escape. I could do this alone. I have enough information to hurt your husband badly, perhaps even fatally, but I would prefer to do it with you, because you deserve to be part of this. You deserve to see his face when he realizes that the wife he dismissed as decorative and passive has taken everything from him." Elena looked into his gray eyes, searching for deception and finding only a cold, clear purpose that matched her own. He was using her, she knew. He needed her access and her knowledge and her cooperation, but she was using him too, using his skills and his resources and his connections to achieve what she could never accomplish alone. It was a partnership of convenience, built on mutual betrayal and shared vengeance, and somehow that made it more honest than anything she had experienced in 30 years of marriage. "How do we begin?" she asked. Marcus released her hand and sat back. "First, we establish secure communication," he said. "I will give you a phone that cannot be traced, a phone that your husband will never find. We will use it to coordinate our efforts and share information. Second, you will begin gathering the access I need. Account numbers, passwords, schedules, anything that will help me understand his movements and his vulnerabilities. Third, you will continue to play the role of the obedient wife, at least for now. Salvatore cannot suspect that you are working against him. He must believe that your request for divorce was emotional, impulsive, something that can be managed or ignored. Can you do that?" Elena nodded slowly. "I have been playing a role for 30 years, she said. "I can play it a little longer." "Good," Marcus said. "And finally, we need to discuss timing. How long do you believe you can remain in that house without arousing suspicion?" Elena considered the question. "Salvatore is arrogant," she said. "He believes I am harmless, that my threat of divorce was an empty gesture. He will try to wait me out, to make me crawl back to him when I realize I have nowhere else to go. I can maintain this facade for weeks, perhaps months, as long as I continue to appear defeated." "Then we have time," Marcus said. "Not unlimited time, but enough. I estimate that we will need 6 to 8 weeks to complete the transfer of assets and arrange for your departure. During that time, you will gather what I need, and I will prepare the mechanisms for moving his money. When the moment comes, we will act simultaneously, and by the time Salvatore realizes what has happened, you will be beyond his reach." Elena felt something shift inside her, a door opening onto a future she had never dared to imagine. "And what about Vivian?" she asked. "What about your wife?" Marcus's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been pain or might have been satisfaction. "My wife believes she is leaving me for a wealthy and powerful man who will give her everything she desires," he said. "She does not know that by the time she tries to leave, there will be nothing left. Salvatore Corsetti will be ruined, financially and professionally, and the man she thought was her salvation will become her destruction. She chose him, Mrs. Corsetti, and choices have consequences. Elena heard the finality in his voice, the cold certainty of a man who had calculated every outcome. She understood, in that moment, that Marcus Mercer was far more dangerous than any of the stories had suggested. He was not driven by rage or passion or wounded pride. He was driven by something colder and more precise, a methodical determination to balance the scales of justice according to his own arithmetic. He would destroy Vivian, as surely as he would destroy Salvatore, and he would do it with the same detached efficiency that he brought to every job. But Elena found that she did not care. Vivian had chosen to sleep with a married man, knowing what he was, knowing the damage it would cause. She had made her decision, and now she would live with the results. Elena had no sympathy to spare for the woman who had taken what was not hers, even if what she had taken was a husband Elena no longer wanted. "When do we start?" she asked. Marcus reached into his jacket again and withdrew a small phone, sleek and black and untraceable. "We start now," he said, placing the phone on the table. "Keep this hidden. Memorize the number I have programmed into it. Contact me only when you have something to share, and never from anywhere your husband might be monitoring. I will reach out to you when I have information that requires your action." Elena took the phone and slipped it into her purse, feeling its weight like a promise. "Is there anything else?" she asked. Marcus rose from his chair, and for a moment he looked almost human, almost kind. "Yes," he said. "Trust no one except yourself, Mrs. Corsetti. Not your lawyers, not your friends, not even me. Trust only what you can verify with your own eyes and your own judgment. In this world, betrayal is the only constant, and the moment you forget, that is the moment you become a victim. You have been a victim long enough. It is time to become something else." He walked out of the cafe without looking back, and Elena sat alone at the table, the untouched espresso growing cold before her. She looked out the window at the street, at the ordinary people living their ordinary lives, and she felt as though she had crossed a threshold into a world where nothing was ordinary anymore. She had just agreed to help a professional fixer steal $100 million from her husband. She had just formed an alliance with a man whose name was spoken in whispers, whose reputation was written in blood and silence. She had just set in motion a chain of events that could not be stopped, a plan that would either destroy Salvatore Corsetti or destroy her. But as Elena rose from her chair and walked out into the afternoon sunlight, she realized that she was not afraid. She was alive in a way she had not been for decades, burning with a purpose that had transformed her grief into something sharp and useful. Salvatore had underestimated her, just as he had underestimated everyone who was not himself. He believed she was weak, that she was broken, that she had nothing left to fight with. He was wrong. Elena returned to the mansion that evening with a smile on her face and submission in her posture, playing the role she had perfected over 30 years. Salvatore looked up when she entered, and she saw the satisfaction in his eyes, the certainty that she had realized her mistake and come crawling back. "I have been thinking," she said, and her voice was soft, defeated, exactly what he expected. "Perhaps I was too hasty. Perhaps we can discuss this more calmly." Salvatore nodded, his smile widening. "Of course," he said. "I knew you would see reason. We will talk tomorrow after I return from my meeting. There is no need for lawyers or dramatics. We are family, Elena. We can work this out." Elena bowed her head, hiding the triumph in her eyes. "Yes," she said. "We are family." She went upstairs to her bedroom and locked the door, and then she took out the phone Marcus had given her and held it in her hands like a weapon. The game had begun, and for the first time in her life, Elena Corsetti was not a piece being moved across the board. She was a player, and she intended to win. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in deception. Elena moved through the mansion like a ghost, present but not noticed, obedient but watchful. She resumed her role as the dutiful wife with a precision that surprised even herself, attending dinners and functions at Salvatore's side, smiling when expected, speaking only when spoken to. The other wives looked at her with something like pity, assuming she had surrendered. that her brief rebellion had been crushed under the weight of her husband's will. They did not know that behind her lowered eyes and soft voice, Elena was cataloging everything, memorizing schedules and conversations, noting who came and went and what they carried with them. Salvatore, for his part, seemed pleased with her submission. He treated her with a kind of benevolent condescension, the way a man might treat a pet that had finally learned its place. He brought her flowers one evening, roses the color of blood, and he kissed her forehead and told her he was glad she had come to her senses. Elena accepted the roses with murmured thanks and placed them in a vase in the foyer, where they wilted slowly over the following days, their petals falling one by one like promises broken. She began her work the third night after her meeting with Marcus. Salvatore had gone to one of his late meetings, the kind that ran until dawn and left him sleeping until noon the next day. Elena waited until she heard his car leave the driveway, and then she waited another hour, ensuring that no one would return unexpectedly. Only then did she rise from her bed and make her way through the darkened house to his study. The safe behind his mother's portrait was the first target. Elena had watched Salvatore open it countless times over the years, always from the corner of her eye, always pretending to be absorbed in something else. He changed the combination every few months, a paranoid habit she had once found tiresome. But she had observed the most recent change just 2 weeks earlier. Her fingers trembled as she turned the dial, but her memory was clear. Left to 27, right to 14, left to 53, right to 8. The lock clicked and the safe door swung open, revealing the contents that Salvatore trusted no one to see. There were stacks of cash, more than Elena could count in the dim light. There were documents and folders, deeds and contracts and agreements written in languages she did not recognize. There were photographs, old and yellowed, of men she had never seen, some of them marked with dates and locations that meant nothing to her. And there was a leather notebook small enough to fit in a pocket, filled with handwritten numbers and codes that seemed to correspond to nothing else in the safe. Elena photographed everything with the phone Marcus had given her, working quickly and methodically, replacing each item exactly as she had found it. The notebook received special attention, each page captured in high resolution. The cramped handwriting that she recognized as Salvatore's own, preserved in digital form. When she was finished, she closed the safe and reset the combination, ensuring that not a single detail was out of place. She sent the photographs to Marcus that night, and his response came within minutes. Excellent work. The notebook contains account numbers and access codes for his offshore holdings. This is exactly what I needed. Continue gathering what you can. Be careful. Elena deleted the messages and hid the phone in the lining of an old coat she never wore, one that hung in the back of her closet beneath a collection of garments Salvatore would never think to examine. Then she returned to her bed and lay in the darkness, listening to her own heartbeat and feeling something she had not felt in years. She felt powerful. The days took on a rhythm, a dance of deception that Elena performed with increasing confidence. She learned to read Salvatore's moods, to anticipate when he would be distracted enough for her to search his study or listen to his phone calls. She learned which of his soldiers could be avoided, and which ones watched her with suspicion that never quite solidified into action. She learned the patterns of the household staff, the routines that governed their movements, the moments when she could act without being observed, and she learned things about her husband that she had never known, secrets that had accumulated over 30 years like sediment at the bottom of a river. She discovered that he kept a separate phone hidden in his desk drawer, a phone that received messages from Vivian Mercer at all hours of the day and night. She discovered that he had been skimming money from his own organization for over a decade, diverting funds into accounts that not even his consigliere knew existed. She discovered that 3 of his most trusted capos were secretly reporting to the Castellano family, their loyalty purchased years ago by men who understood that the best way to destroy an empire was from within. This last discovery she shared with Marcus during one of their rare phone conversations, speaking in coded phrases they had established in their first meeting. He was silent for a long moment after she finished, and when he spoke, there was something in his voice that might have been admiration. "You have been busy," he said. This information changes everything. Salvatore believes his inner circle is secure, but he has been surrounded by traitors for years. When the time comes, his own people will be the first to abandon him. Elena felt a cold satisfaction settle in her chest. Good, she said. He deserves to know what it feels like to be betrayed by those he trusts. Marcus made a sound that might have been a laugh. Careful, Mrs. Corsetti. That kind of thinking can become addictive. Revenge is a fire that consumes everything it touches, including those who light it. Elena paused, surprised by the warning. Is that not what we are doing? She asked. Taking revenge? We are pursuing justice, Marcus replied, and his voice was careful, measured. There is a difference, though the line can be difficult to see. Revenge is emotional. It seeks to cause pain in proportion to pain received. Justice is rational. It seeks to restore balance, to correct an imbalance that should never have existed. What your husband has done to you, what my wife has done to me, these are imbalances that must be corrected. But we must not lose ourselves in the process. We must remain clear about what we are doing and why. Elena considered his words. And what are we doing, she asked. Truly? We are taking back what was stolen from us, Marcus said. Our dignity, our agency, our futures. The money is secondary. It is a means to an end, not the end itself. When this is over, you will be free to become whoever you choose to be. That is the real prize, Mrs. Corsetti. That is what we are fighting for. The conversation ended, and Elena sat alone in her bedroom, thinking about what he had said. She had spent so many years focused on survival that she had forgotten what it meant to live. She had forgotten that she had once been a young woman with dreams and ambitions, a woman who had believed that love was possible, and that happiness was something more than the absence of pain. Salvatore had stolen that from her, slowly and methodically, until she had forgotten it was ever there. But now she was remembering, and with each piece of information she gathered, each secret she uncovered, she felt herself becoming someone new, not the woman she had been before her marriage, not the ghost she had become during it, but someone else entirely, someone stronger, someone who would never again allow herself to be diminished by the cruelty of others. The fourth week brought a complication that Elena had not anticipated. Enzo Battaglia, Salvatore's consigliere, requested a private meeting with her. Enzo was an old man now, nearly 80, with white hair and a face that had seen every kind of human darkness and learned to look upon it without flinching. He had served the Corsetti family for over 50 years, first as a soldier, then as a capo, and finally as the voice of reason at Salvatore's right hand. He was said to be wise, to see things that others missed, to understand the currents that flowed beneath the surface of events. Elena had always been wary of him, sensing that his quiet observation might one day prove dangerous. They met in the garden behind the mansion, among the roses that Elena had planted years ago, and tended with the only passion Salvatore had ever allowed her. Enzo walked slowly, leaning on a cane, but his eyes were sharp as they studied her face. "Mrs. Corsetti," he said, and his voice was gentle, almost paternal. "I hope you will forgive an old man's curiosity. I have watched you for many years, and I have seen things that perhaps others have missed. You are not a foolish woman. You are not weak. And yet you have chosen to remain in a situation that would have broken most people long ago." Elena kept her expression neutral. "I made my choices," she said, "just as we all do." Enzo nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "choices. That is what I wanted to discuss. I have noticed certain changes in you recently. A new light in your eyes, a new purpose in your movements. You are planning something, Mrs. Corsetti. I do not know what it is, and I do not need to know, but I felt it was important to speak with you before things go too far." Elena felt her heart begin to race, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I do not know what you mean," she said. Enzo smiled, a thin and knowing smile. "Of course not," he said, "but let me tell you a story, if you will indulge me. Many years ago, when I was young and foolish, I served a Don who believed himself invincible. He had built an empire through violence and cunning, and he had forgotten that empires are built by men, and men are mortal. He made enemies without counting them. He betrayed allies without considering the consequences, and when the end came, it came swiftly, from a direction he never anticipated. He paused, his eyes fixed on a rose that had begun to wilt. "The lesson I learned," he continued, "is that no one is invincible. Not dons, not empires, not the carefully constructed walls we build around our secrets. Everything falls eventually. The only question is whether we are standing inside the walls when they collapse, or whether we have had the wisdom to step outside before the end." Elena met his gaze. "Why are you telling me this?" Enzo reached out and touched one of the wilting roses, his fingers gentle against the dying petals. "Because I have served the Corsetti family for 50 years, he said. "Because I have watched Salvatore become something his father would not have recognized, something consumed by his own appetites and blind to his own vulnerabilities. And because I am old enough to know that loyalty has its limits, even for men like me." He turned to face her directly, and there was no deception in his eyes, only a weary honesty that surprised her. "I know about Vivian Mercer," he said quietly. "I have known for some time, and I know that you know. What I do not know is what you intend to do with that knowledge, but I suspect it is something that will change everything." Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "If you know," she said carefully, "then why have you not told Salvatore?" Enzo shrugged, a gesture that seemed to carry the weight of decades. "Because Salvatore no longer listens to counsel," he said. "Because he has become so convinced of his own invulnerability that he dismisses any warning as the fearfulness of lesser men. And because, if I am being entirely honest, I am tired. I have spent my life serving men who believed they were gods, and I have watched them all fall. Perhaps it is time for something different. Perhaps it is time for the scales to finally balance." He began to walk back toward the house, his cane tapping against the stone path. "I will not stand in your way, Mrs. Corsetti," he said over his shoulder. "Whatever you are planning, I will not interfere. Consider this my gift to you for all the years you have suffered in silence. But be careful. Salvatore may be blind, but he is not without resources. And when cornered, he is more dangerous than you can imagine." He disappeared into the house, and Elena stood alone among the roses, her mind racing. Enzo Battaglia knew. He knew about the affair, and he suspected she was planning something. But instead of exposing her, he had offered her a warning and something that felt almost like an alliance. She reported the conversation to Marcus that evening, and he was silent for a long time before responding. "The consigliere is either a fool or a genius," he said finally. "Either way, we must proceed with caution. He may be sincere in his offer of neutrality, or he may be positioning himself to survive whatever comes next. Trust no one, Mrs. Corsetti, not even those who seem to be on your side." But Elena had already made her decision. Enzo had given her something valuable, something beyond his promise of non-interference. He had confirmed that Salvatore's empire was built on foundations of sand, that the loyalty of his inner circle was fractured and uncertain. When the time came to strike, there would be no one left to defend him. The 5th week brought the breakthrough they had been waiting for. Elena discovered the location of Salvatore's most secure accounts, the ones that contained the majority of his hidden wealth. The information was buried in a conversation she overheard between Salvatore and a man she did not recognize. A banker who had flown in from Geneva specifically to discuss the restructuring of certain holdings. They met in Salvatore's study, speaking in low voices that Elena captured through a door she had learned to leave slightly ajar. The banker spoke of numbered accounts and transfer protocols, of security measures that would ensure the money remained untraceable. And he spoke a phrase that made Elena's heart stop, the Prometheus Protocol. She did not know what it meant, but she memorized every detail of the conversation and relayed it to Marcus that night. His response came quickly, and there was excitement in his words that she had never heard before. "The Prometheus Protocol is a contingency system," he explained. It allows for the rapid transfer of assets in the event of a crisis. Your husband has been preparing for the possibility that his empire might fall, Mrs. Corsetti. He has created a mechanism for moving his wealth to safety at a moment's notice, but that mechanism can work in both directions. If I can access the protocol, I can use it to move his money anywhere I choose. And can you access it? Elena asked. With the information you have provided, yes, Marcus replied. I will need another 2 weeks to prepare, but when the time comes, we will be able to transfer everything in a matter of hours. Your husband will wake up one morning believing himself a king, and by nightfall, he will have nothing left but his name. Elena closed her eyes and allowed herself to imagine it. Salvatore stripped of his power, his money, his empire. Salvatore, forced to confront the consequences of a lifetime of cruelty and betrayal. Salvatore finally understanding what it felt like to be the one who was abandoned and dismissed. It was not enough. It would never be enough to erase 30 years of suffering, but it was a beginning. It was justice, the kind that Marcus had described, the restoration of balance that should never have been disrupted in the first place. 2 more weeks, she whispered into the phone. And then we end this, Marcus said. One way or another, we end this. Elena deleted the messages and hid the phone, and she went to bed with a smile on her face that Salvatore never saw. The end was coming, and she was ready. She had been waiting her entire life for this moment. She had not known it until now, but every year of silence, every humiliation endured, every dream abandoned had been leading her here. To this house, to this night, to the edge of a cliff from which she would either fly or fall. Either way, she would finally be free. The final days moved with the terrible slowness of a blade descending. Elena counted them like beads on a rosary, each one bringing her closer to the moment that would change everything. She continued to play her role with mechanical precision, attending to her duties as Salvatore's wife, while her mind churned with calculations and contingencies. The mask she wore had become so familiar that she sometimes forgot it was a mask at all, slipping into the submissive persona as easily as breathing, then slipping out again when she was alone with her thoughts and her hidden phone. Marcus sent updates at irregular intervals, brief messages that painted a picture of meticulous preparation. He had assembled a team, he told her, people whose discretion was absolute and whose skills were unmatched. He had established the infrastructure necessary for the transfer, creating a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts through which Salvatore's money would flow like water through a series of locks, each step removing it further from its source, until it became untraceable. He had prepared documents that would establish Elena's new identity, a complete life waiting for her in a country where Salvatore's name meant nothing and his reach could not extend. Everything is in place, his final message read. We move in 3 days. Be ready. Elena read the message and felt something cold settle in her stomach. 3 days. 72 hours until she either walked away from this life forever or discovered that her bid for freedom had been nothing more than a dream. She deleted the message and hid the phone, and she went downstairs to dinner with a smile on her face and ice in her veins. Salvatore was in good spirits that evening, which meant he was cruel in the subtle way that only those who knew him well could recognize. He spoke at length about a business deal he had concluded, a rival who had been persuaded to sell his interests at a fraction of their value. He did not explain what form the persuasion had taken, but Elena saw the satisfaction in his eyes and understood that somewhere in the city, man was nursing wounds that would never fully heal. You have been very quiet lately, Salvatore said, turning his attention to her with the suddenness of a predator spotting movement. Is everything all right? Elena lowered her eyes, the gesture of submission she had perfected over decades. I have been thinking, she said, about our conversation, about the future, and what have you concluded? Salvatore asked, and there was amusement in his voice, the amusement of a man who already knew the answer. That I was foolish to speak of divorce, Elena replied. That I have a good life here, a life that many women would envy. I allowed my emotions to overcome my judgment, and I am sorry for that. Salvatore reached across the table and patted her hand, a gesture that might have seemed affectionate to an outside observer, but felt to Elena like a chain being fastened around her wrist. "I forgive you," he said. "Women are emotional creatures. It is their nature. The important thing is that you have come to your senses and recognized your proper place." Elena swallowed the rage that rose in her throat and forced herself to nod. "Yes," she said, "my proper place." Salvatore returned to his meal, satisfied, and Elena sat in silence for the rest of the dinner, counting the hours until she would never have to endure his condescension again. The second day brought a development that nearly derailed everything. Elena was in the garden tending to her roses when she heard voices approaching from inside the house. She recognized Salvatore's voice immediately, but the other voice took her a moment to place. When she did, her blood ran cold. It was Vivian Mercer. Elena remained where she was, hidden behind a trellis of climbing vines, and she listened as Salvatore led his mistress through the French doors and into the garden. They were speaking in low voices, intimate and conspiratorial, and Elena pressed herself against the wall and strained to hear. "I do not understand why you brought me here," Vivian was saying. Her voice was younger than Elena had imagined, with a breathless quality that suggested excitement rather than fear. "If your wife sees me." "My wife sees nothing," Salvatore replied, and there was contempt in his voice that cut Elena like a knife. "She is a piece of furniture, Vivian. She has no eyes, no ears, no thoughts of her own. I could parade you through the front door and she would convince herself she had imagined it." Vivian laughed, a silvery sound that made Elena's hands clench into fists. "You are terrible," she said, "but I love that about you." Elena listened as they walked deeper into the garden, their voices fading but not disappearing entirely. She caught fragments of conversation, words that painted a picture she had already understood but had never heard spoken aloud. Salvatore was making promises, the kind of promises men made to their mistresses when they wanted to secure continued access without commitment. He spoke of a future together, of a time when complications would be resolved and they could be truly free. He spoke of Elena as an obstacle that would eventually be removed, though he did not specify how. And Vivian, foolish Vivian, believed every word. She did not know that Salvatore had made these same promises to other women over the years, women who had vanished when they became inconvenient, or when Salvatore's attention shifted to someone new. She did not know that the man she had chosen as her salvation was incapable of love, incapable of loyalty, incapable of seeing any person as more than a tool to be used and discarded. She did not know that her own husband, the man she had betrayed without a second thought, was preparing to take everything from her and leave her with nothing but the ashes of her illusions. Elena remained hidden until they returned to the house, and then she slipped away to her bedroom and sent a message to Marcus. "Vivian was here today. Salvatore brought her to the house. He believes I am blind." Marcus's response came within minutes. "Good. Let him believe it. His arrogance is our greatest asset. Tomorrow, everything changes." That night, Elena could not sleep. She lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her, and thinking about the woman who had walked through her garden on the arm of her husband. Vivian Mercer was not what Elena had expected. She had imagined someone calculating, someone who knew exactly what she was doing, and had made a cold decision to pursue a powerful man regardless of the consequences. But the woman she had heard today sounded different. She sounded young and naive, swept up in a romance that she believed was real, blind to the truth that Elena had learned through decades of suffering. For a moment, Elena felt something that might have been pity. Vivian did not deserve what was coming to her. Not really. She was guilty of poor judgment and moral weakness, but she was not evil in the way that Salvatore was evil. She was simply a woman who had made a terrible choice and would now pay a terrible price. But the moment passed, and the pity faded, replaced by the cold clarity that had sustained Elena through the past weeks. Vivian had made her choice. She had chosen to betray her husband, to pursue another woman's husband, to build her happiness on a foundation of lies and broken promises. She had not cared about the pain she caused, had not considered the lives she disrupted, had not thought beyond her own desires, and now she would face the consequences of that selfishness, just as Salvatore would face the consequences of his cruelty. Justice did not care about intentions, it cared only about balance. The third day dawned gray and cold, the sky heavy with clouds that promised rain before nightfall. Elena rose early and dressed with care, choosing clothes that were practical but unremarkable, the kind of outfit that would not draw attention if she needed to move quickly. She packed a small bag with essentials, things she could not leave behind, and she hid it in the back of her closet behind the coat that concealed Marcus's phone. Salvatore left for his office at 9, kissing her forehead with his usual absent affection and telling her not to wait up. He had meetings that would run late, he said, and she understood without being told that those meetings would include time with Vivian. Elena watched him go from the window of her bedroom, and she felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no regret. Only a vast and peaceful emptiness, the calm that came before a storm. The message from Marcus arrived at noon. It is time. Leave the house at exactly 3 o'clock and go to the address I have sent. Tell no one. Bring only what you can carry. Do not look back. Elena read the message and deleted it, and then she sat on her bed and waited. The hours stretched before her like a desert, endless and empty, and she filled them by walking through the house one final time. She visited every room, touching the furniture and the walls and the objects that had surrounded her for 30 years. She was not saying goodbye, exactly. These things had never been hers, not really. They belonged to Salvatore, to the empire he had built, to the life she had never chosen. But she wanted to remember them, to carry with her a memory of what she was leaving behind so that she would never be tempted to return. At 2:30, she retrieved her bag from the closet and checked its contents one final time. The phone Marcus had given her, the documents she had gathered over the past weeks, a few pieces of jewelry that had been gifts from her own family, before they had all passed away and left her alone in Salvatore's world. A photograph of her mother, the only image she had managed to keep through all the years. She looked at herself in the mirror, and for a moment, she did not recognize the woman who looked back. This woman had sharp eyes and a determined set to her jaw. This woman was not afraid. This woman was ready. At exactly 3 o'clock, Elena Corsetti walked out of the mansion she had called home for 30 years, and she did not look back. The address Marcus had given her led to a warehouse in Red Hook, a building that looked abandoned from the outside but hummed with activity within. Elena parked her car in the shadow of a rusted shipping container and approached the entrance, her heart pounding in her chest despite her efforts to remain calm. A man appeared from the shadows, tall and silent, with the watchful eyes of someone who had spent his life noticing things others missed. He did not speak, only nodded and gestured for her to follow. Elena walked behind him through a maze of corridors, past rooms filled with equipment she did not recognize, until they reached a door at the end of a long hallway. The door opened onto a space that looked like something from a science fiction film. Banks of computer monitors lined the walls, their screens filled with numbers and charts that scrolled continuously. Men and women sat at workstations, their fingers flying over keyboards, their faces illuminated by the glow of their screens. And at the center of it all stood Marcus Mercer, watching the controlled chaos with the calm of a conductor leading an orchestra. He turned when Elena entered, and something that might have been a smile crossed his face. "Mrs. Corsetti," he said, "welcome to the end of your old life." Elena looked around the room, taking in the scope of what Marcus had built. "This is how you do it," she said. "This is how you make things disappear." "This is one way," Marcus replied. "There are others, depending on what needs to disappear. But for what we are doing today, this is the most effective approach." He gestured toward a chair beside his own workstation. "Please sit. The process has already begun, but I want you to see it. I want you to understand exactly what we are doing." Elena sat, and Marcus pointed to the central monitor, where a series of transactions was unfolding in real time. The Prometheus Protocol, he explained, is designed to move large amounts of money quickly and securely. It uses a cascade of transfers, each one routing through a different jurisdiction, each one obscuring the trail left by the one before. Under normal circumstances, it would take days or weeks to complete. But with the access codes you provided, we have been able to accelerate the process. By midnight, every dollar of your husband's hidden wealth will be beyond his reach. Elena watched the numbers scroll across the screen, millions of dollars moving from account to account like water flowing through a series of channels. It was hypnotic, almost beautiful in its precision. "And where is it going?" she asked. Marcus smiled. "50 million is being transferred to accounts in your name," he said. "Accounts in Switzerland, Singapore, and the Cayman Islands, distributed across multiple institutions to ensure that no single point of failure can compromise your security. The other 50 million is being donated to various charitable organizations that work with victims of domestic violence and organized crime. I thought that was an appropriate use for money accumulated through suffering." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them away. "You did that?" she asked. "Without telling me?" "I thought it was fitting," Marcus replied. "Your husband built his fortune on the backs of people who had no choice but to serve him. This is a way of returning some of that to those who need it most, and it ensures that the money cannot be traced back to either of us. Charitable donations are difficult to investigate, especially when they are made anonymously through offshore foundations." Elena shook her head in wonder. "You have thought of everything," she said. "I have tried," Marcus replied, and there was weariness in his voice that she had not heard before. "This is what I do, Mrs. Corsetti. I solve problems. But some problems cannot be solved with money or planning. Some problems require something more." He fell silent, and Elena understood that he was thinking about his wife, Vivian Mercer, who at this very moment was probably preparing for an evening with Salvatore, unaware that her world was about to collapse. Vivian, who would wake up tomorrow to discover that her husband had vanished and her lover had been ruined, and who would have no one left to turn to. "What will happen to her?" Elena asked quietly. "To Vivian?" Marcus did not answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless. "She will face the consequences of her choices," he said, "just as we all do. I have made arrangements for her to receive the divorce papers tomorrow morning, along with documentation of the affair that will make any legal challenge impossible. She will receive nothing from our marriage except what the law requires me to give her, which is very little. And she will have to explain to herself why the man she betrayed everything for has suddenly lost interest in her. You are not going to?" Elena hesitated, uncertain how to phrase the question. "You are not going to hurt her?" Marcus turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes that she could not quite read. "I am not a murderer, Mrs. Corsetti," he said. "I have done many things in my career that weigh on my conscience. But I have never killed anyone who did not deserve it, and I have never harmed an innocent. Vivian is not innocent, but she is also not evil. She is simply foolish and selfish, and those are not capital crimes. She will suffer the natural consequences of her actions, which is suffering enough." Elena nodded, relieved in a way she had not expected to be. She had allied herself with a dangerous man, a man whose profession was making problems vanish, and she had not fully considered what that might mean. But Marcus Mercer, for all his reputation, seemed to operate according to a code that she could understand. He was not indiscriminate in his violence. He was precise, surgical, targeted. He destroyed what needed to be destroyed, and left the rest standing. It was more than she could say for her husband. The hours passed in a blur of activity, the team around them working with silent efficiency as the transfer continued. Elena watched the numbers climb, watched her new life take shape in the form of digits on a screen, and she felt the weight of 30 years begin to lift from her shoulders. By 9 o'clock, the transfer was more than halfway complete. By 11, it was nearly finished, and at exactly midnight, Marcus turned to her with something that was almost a smile. "It is done," he said. $100 million has been moved beyond your husband's reach. 50 million is yours, secured in accounts that only you can access. The rest has been distributed to organizations that will use it to help those who cannot help themselves. Salvatore Corsetti is, as of this moment, a man with nothing but his name and his reputation. Elena stared at the screen, at the final confirmation that flashed across it like a verdict. She had done it. She had actually done it. She had taken everything from the man who had taken everything from her, and she had done it without violence, without bloodshed, without becoming the monster that he was. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we disappear," Marcus replied. He stood and gestured for her to follow. "I have a plane waiting at a private airfield. It will take you to Geneva, where you will spend a few weeks establishing your new identity. From there, you can go anywhere in the world. You can become anyone you choose. The only rule is that you never return to this life, never contact anyone from your past, never give Salvatore Corsetti a thread to follow back to you." Elena rose from her chair on legs that felt unsteady. "And you?" she asked. "What will you do?" Marcus's expression did not change. "I have my own arrangements," he said, "my own disappearance to orchestrate. Our paths will not cross again, Mrs. Corsetti. This is goodbye." Elena looked at him, this man who had given her back her life, this stranger who had become the most important ally she had ever known. "Thank you," she said, and the words felt inadequate, too small to contain everything she felt, for everything. "I do not know how I can ever repay you." Marcus shook his head. "There is no debt between us," he said. "We helped each other, that is all. Now go. Your car is waiting outside. Do not stop until you reach the airfield and do not look back. The past is behind you, Mrs. Corsetti. All that remains is the future." Elena nodded, and she turned and walked out of the warehouse into the cold night air. A car was waiting, just as Marcus had said, with a driver who did not speak and did not need to. She climbed into the back seat and closed her eyes, and as the car began to move, she allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in 30 years. She felt hope. Behind her, in a mansion on the Upper East Side, Salvatore Corsetti slept beside his mistress, dreaming of an empire that no longer existed. He did not know that his wife had vanished. He did not know that his fortune had evaporated. He did not know that the world he had built was crumbling around him, and that by morning he would have nothing left but the ruins. But he would learn. Soon enough, he would learn. And Elena Corsetti, the woman he had dismissed as decoration, would be far beyond his reach, starting a new life in a world where his name meant nothing and his power could not touch her. She had won. Against all odds, against everything she had been taught to believe about herself and her place in the world, she had won, and she would never look back. The morning came to Manhattan like a judgment, gray light seeping through the windows of the Corsetti mansion, and finding rooms that had never seemed so empty. Salvatore woke alone, which was not unusual, but he woke to a silence that felt different, a stillness that pressed against his skin like something living. He reached for his phone and found 17 missed calls. His consigliere, his accountant, his lawyer. Numbers that flashed across the screen like warnings he had not yet learned to read. He sat up in bed and dialed Enzo Battaglia, and when the old man answered, his voice was strange, flattened by something that might have been shock or might have been resignation. "You need to come to the office," Enzo said, "now. There has been a situation." "What kind of situation?" Salvatore demanded. And already he could feel something cold beginning to spread through his chest. The first tendrils of a fear he had not experienced in decades. "The kind that cannot be explained over the phone," Enzo replied. "Come now, and Salvatore. Prepare yourself." The line went dead and Salvatore sat in the silence of his bedroom, staring at the phone in his hand. He had built an empire on the principle that preparation was everything, that no threat could surprise a man who had anticipated every possibility. But as he rose and dressed with hands that had begun to tremble, he understood that he had not anticipated this. He had not anticipated anything because he had believed himself beyond the reach of consequences. He was wrong. The office was chaos when he arrived, men in expensive suits moving with the frantic energy of ants whose hill had been disturbed. Salvatore walked through the lobby and felt their eyes on him, felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. No one met his gaze. No one spoke. They parted before him like water before a ship, and their silence was louder than any accusation. Enzo was waiting in the conference room, along with the accountant, a thin man named Morrison who had managed Salvatore's finances for 15 years. Morrison's face was the color of old paper, and his hands shook as he spread documents across the table. "Tell me," Salvatore said, and his voice was calm, the voice of a man who had not yet accepted what was happening. "Tell me what is going on." Morrison looked at Enzo, and Enzo nodded, and Morrison began to speak. His words were clinical, precise, the language of numbers and transactions and financial instruments. But beneath the technical terminology, a story emerged, a narrative of systematic destruction that left Salvatore feeling as though the floor had opened beneath his feet. The accounts were empty, all of them. Every offshore holding, every shell company, every hidden reserve that Salvatore had accumulated over 30 years of criminal enterprise. $170 million vanished overnight, routed through a cascade of transfers that had left no trail, no evidence, no way to recover what had been lost. Morrison spread printouts across the table, showing the progression of the theft. The Prometheus Protocol, the system Salvatore had created to protect his wealth in the event of a crisis, had been turned against him. Someone had accessed the master codes, had triggered the transfer sequence, had directed his fortune into a labyrinth of accounts from which it could never be retrieved. "Who?" Salvatore asked, and his voice was barely a whisper. "Who did this?" Enzo reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope, which he placed on the table before Salvatore. "This was delivered this morning," he said. "It was addressed to you." Salvatore stared at the envelope for a long moment before reaching for it. His name was written on the front in handwriting he recognized, handwriting he had seen 1,000 times on grocery lists and appointment reminders, and the occasional birthday card. Elena's handwriting, his wife's handwriting. He opened the envelope and withdrew a single sheet of paper, and he read the words written there with eyes that refused to believe what they were seeing. "Salvatore," the letter began. "By the time you read this, I will be gone. Not dead, as you might prefer, but simply gone, to a place where your name means nothing and your power cannot reach. I have taken what I am owed, what 30 years of silence and suffering have earned me, and I have left you with exactly what you deserve. Nothing. You believed I was blind, but I saw everything. I saw every betrayal, every cruelty, every moment when you chose your appetites over your obligations. I saw Vivian Mercer in your arms, in our garden, in the home where I was supposed to be your wife. And I decided that if you would not give me the freedom I asked for, I would take it for myself. I did not do this alone. Your arrogance created enemies you never knew existed, and those enemies were happy to help me destroy you. By now, your accounts are empty, your secrets are exposed, and the men you thought were loyal are discovering that loyalty to a fallen king is a poor investment. You will find no help among them. You will find no refuge anywhere. You are at last exactly what you always made me feel. Alone. Do not try to find me. You will fail, and the attempt will only hasten your own destruction. The people who helped me have resources you cannot imagine, and they have made it clear that any action against me will be met with consequences you are not prepared to face. For once in your life, Salvatore, accept that you have lost. I hope you live a long life. I hope you live long enough to understand what you did to me, and to feel even a fraction of the emptiness you made me feel for 30 years. That is my wish for you. Not death, which would be too quick, but life. A long, empty, powerless life, stripped of everything that made you believe you were more than human. Goodbye, Salvatore. I will not think of you again. Elena. The letter fell from Salvatore's hands and drifted to the table like a leaf in autumn. He stared at it without seeing it, his mind struggling to process what he had read. Elena, his wife, the woman he had dismissed as decoration, as furniture, as nothing more than a necessary accessory to the image he projected to the world. She had done this. She had planned it, executed it, destroyed him with a precision that he would have admired if it had not been directed at himself. "There is more," Enzo said quietly. "The FBI received an anonymous package this morning. Documents detailing your offshore holdings, your shell companies, your connections to certain individuals who have been under investigation for years. They are preparing warrants as we speak. You have perhaps 24 hours before they come for you." Salvatore looked up, and for the first time in his life, Enzo saw fear in his eyes. "Who else knows?" "Everyone," Enzo replied. "The same documents were sent to every major news organization in the city. By tonight, your name will be on every screen and every front page. The empire you built is finished, Salvatore, and there is nothing I or anyone else can do to save it." Salvatore rose from his chair and his legs nearly buckled beneath him. He caught himself on the edge of the table and stood there, swaying, as the full weight of his destruction settled onto his shoulders. Everything he had built, everything he had sacrificed, everything he had done, the bodies and the blood and the endless compromises with his own humanity. All of it had been for nothing. All of it had led to this moment, this room, this letter written in his wife's careful hand. He thought of Vivian then, the woman he had pursued with such single-minded determination, the woman for whom he had risked everything. She was waiting for him, probably, in the apartment he had rented for their trysts, wondering why he had not called, why he had not come. She did not know that the man she had chosen was now worthless, that the power she had been drawn to had evaporated overnight. She did not know that she had tied her fate to a sinking ship. And Marcus Mercer. The name surfaced in Salvatore's mind like a body rising from deep water. Vivian's husband, the fixer, the man who made problems disappear. Elena had said she did not act alone, that she had allies with resources beyond imagining. Who else could it have been? Who else would have had the skills, the connections, the motivation to orchestrate something this complete? Salvatore had been so focused on his conquest of another man's wife that he had never considered what that man might do in response. He had believed, with the arrogance that had defined his entire life, that Marcus Mercer would never discover the affair, or that if he did, he would accept it with the resignation of a man who understood his place in the hierarchy. Salvatore was a don. Marcus was a hired hand, a tool to be used by men of real power. The idea that such a man might strike back, might use his unique skills to destroy the one who had wronged him, had simply never occurred to Salvatore. It was, he realized now, the final measure of his blindness. The hours that followed were a blur of desperate activity, of phone calls unanswered and doors closed in his face. Salvatore reached out to the men who had served him for decades, the capos and soldiers and associates who had sworn loyalty unto death, and he found them suddenly unavailable, their numbers disconnected, their offices empty. The three who had been secretly reporting to the Castellano family vanished entirely, their betrayal now openly acknowledged, their usefulness to Salvatore having ended the moment his power evaporated. Even Enzo Battaglia, who had served the Corsetti family for 50 years, seemed to fade from Salvatore's reach. The old man offered no counsel, no strategy, no path forward. He simply watched with those ancient eyes as his don scrambled to salvage something from the wreckage of his empire, and when Salvatore demanded to know why he was not helping, Enzo's response was a single sentence that cut deeper than any blade. "I warned you," Enzo said. "Years ago, I warned you that this day would come. You did not listen then. I doubt you would listen now." And he walked away, leaving Salvatore alone in the conference room with the ashes of everything he had built. Across the city, in an apartment that had once felt like a sanctuary, Vivian Mercer sat in her living room and stared at the documents that had been delivered that morning. Divorce papers, comprehensive and final, stripping her of any claim to the life she had lived with Marcus for 15 years, and photographs, dozens of them, showing her with Salvatore in moments she had believed were private, intimate, secret. evidence of her betrayal, compiled with a thoroughness that spoke of months of patient observation. There was no note from Marcus, no explanation, no accusation, no final words of anger or pain, just the documents and the photographs, laid out with clinical precision, telling a story she could not deny and could not escape. Her husband knew. He had known for a long time, and he had chosen to destroy her without ever confronting her, without ever giving her the chance to explain or apologize or beg for forgiveness. She tried to call Salvatore, but his phone went straight to voicemail. She tried again and again, growing more frantic with each attempt, until finally she gave up and turned on the television, searching for some distraction from the nightmare her life had become. And there, on every channel, she saw his face. Salvatore Corsetti, alleged crime boss, under investigation for money laundering and racketeering and a dozen other charges that scrolled across the screen like a verdict. His empire had collapsed. His fortune had vanished. His name, which had once commanded respect and fear throughout the city, was now synonymous with disgrace. Vivian stared at the screen, and she understood, with a clarity that felt like ice water running through her veins, that she had lost everything. Her husband was gone, his love replaced by a cold precision that had cut her out of his life with surgical efficiency. Her lover was ruined, his power evaporated, his promises revealed as the empty words of a man who had never intended to keep them. She was alone, truly alone, for the first time in her adult life, and she had no one to blame but herself. She thought of Marcus then, the man she had married and dismissed, the man whose quiet competence she had mistaken for weakness. She had believed he was boring, predictable, incapable of passion or surprise. She had believed she deserved something more, something exciting, something that made her feel alive. And she had found it in Salvatore Corsetti, in his power and his danger, and his absolute certainty that the world existed to serve his desires. But Marcus had been neither boring nor predictable. He had been patient. He had been watching. And he had waited until the perfect moment to reveal that the man she had dismissed was far more dangerous than the man she had chosen. Vivian sat in her empty apartment and cried, not for the marriage she had destroyed or the lover she had lost, but for herself, for the fool she had been, for the woman who had traded everything real for an illusion that had evaporated like morning mist in the harsh light of day. 6 months later, in a villa overlooking Lake Geneva, Elena Corsetti sat on a terrace and watched the sun set over the mountains. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of pine and water, and the silence was broken only by the distant sound of church bells marking the hour. She was no longer Elena Corsetti. That name had died on the night she walked out of the mansion on the Upper East Side, and a new name had risen in its place, a name with no history, no connections, no ties to the world she had left behind. She was a widow now, according to the documents Marcus had provided, a woman whose husband had died years ago and left her comfortably provided for. It was a simple story, unremarkable, the kind of backstory that invited no questions and aroused no suspicions. The transition had been easier than she had expected. The first weeks were difficult, filled with moments of paranoia and disorientation, as she learned to navigate a life without the constant shadow of fear. She jumped at unexpected sounds. She scanned crowds for familiar faces. She woke in the night convinced that Salvatore had found her, that his men were outside her door, that everything she had won would be snatched away at the moment she had finally begun to believe it was real. But the weeks became months, and the paranoia faded, replaced by something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Peace. Simple, ordinary peace, the kind that comes from waking each morning with no one to fear and no role to play. She ate when she was hungry. She slept when she was tired. She walked through the streets of Geneva and Paris and Rome, anonymous and unremarkable, a woman who belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. She had not heard from Marcus Mercer since the night of the transfer. He had vanished as completely as he had promised, leaving no trail, no forwarding address, no way to contact him. She thought of him sometimes, wondering where he had gone, what name he had taken, whether he had found the same peace she had found. She hoped he had. For all his cold precision, for all the darkness that lived behind his gray eyes, he had given her back her life. She wished him well, wherever he was. The news from New York reached her occasionally, fragments of information that drifted across the ocean like debris from a shipwreck. Salvatore had been arrested, tried, and convicted on multiple charges. His sentence was 40 years, which meant he would die in prison. An old man stripped of everything that had once made him powerful. His organization had splintered and collapsed, the various factions turning on each other in a feeding frenzy that left bodies in alleys and headlines in newspapers. The Corsetti name, which had once commanded an empire, was now spoken only in the past tense, a cautionary tale about the wages of arrogance. Elena felt nothing when she read these reports. No satisfaction, no vindication, no lingering connection to the man who had been her husband for 30 years. He had become a stranger to her, a character in a story she had once lived through, but no longer remembered with any clarity. She had left him behind, completely and finally, and she had no interest in looking back. Vivian Mercer's fate was less dramatic but equally complete. The divorce had been finalized quickly, leaving her with nothing but the small settlement the law required and a reputation that made her unemployable in any circle that mattered. She had left New York, Elena heard, retreating to some smaller city where no one knew her name or her history. Whether she had rebuilt her life or simply faded into obscurity, Elena did not know and did not particularly care to find out. The sun touched the mountains, painting them gold and crimson, and Elena closed her eyes and breathed the clean air of her new life. She was 63 years old. She had lost 30 years to a man who did not deserve them. But she had decades left, decades that belonged to her and her alone, decades in which she could become whoever she chose to be. She thought about the young woman she had been, the girl who had married Salvatore Corsetti, believing that love was possible and that happiness was something more than the absence of pain. That girl had been naive, foolish, blind to the truth of what she was walking into. But she had also been brave in her own way. She had survived, she had endured. And when the opportunity had finally come, she had seized it with a ferocity that surprised even herself. Elena opened her eyes and looked out at the mountains, at the vast and beautiful world that had been waiting for her all along, hidden behind the walls of her gilded prison. She smiled, a real smile, the kind she had almost forgotten how to make. She was free, not because someone had rescued her, not because fate had intervened on her behalf. She was free because she had chosen to be free, because she had found the courage to act when action seemed impossible, because she had refused to accept that her story had to end in submission and silence. The church bells rang again, marking another hour, and Elena rose from her chair and went inside to make dinner. Tomorrow, she would take a train to a village she had read about, a place with a famous market, and a view of the lake that was said to be extraordinary. Next week, she would begin classes in painting, something she had always wanted to learn but had never been permitted to pursue. Next month, she would travel to a country she had never visited, exploring streets she had only seen in photographs and tasting foods she had only read about in books. Her life stretched before her like an unwritten book, full of blank pages waiting to be filled. And she would fill them, one by one, with experiences and memories and moments of joy that belonged to no one but herself. Behind her, in a prison cell in New York, Salvatore Corsetti sat in darkness and thought about the wife he had underestimated. He would think about her every day for the rest of his life, wondering how he had been so blind, wondering what he might have done differently, wondering if there was any world in which he might have won. But there was no such world. There had never been such a world. Elena had simply been waiting, all those years, for the right moment to strike. And when that moment came, she had not hesitated. She had won. And somewhere in the distance, perhaps in Geneva, or perhaps somewhere else entirely, Marcus Mercer raised a glass to the woman who had helped him achieve his own justice, and he smiled the cold, satisfied smile of a man whose accounts were finally balanced. The story was over. The scales had been righted, and the two betrayed spouses who had found each other in the wreckage of their marriages had emerged from the flames transformed, reborn, free to write whatever endings they chose. Elena chose peace, Marcus chose solitude, and Salvatore and Vivian were left with nothing but the consequences of their own cruelty and foolishness, trapped in the ruins of lives they had destroyed through their own choices. It was not a happy ending exactly, but it was a just one, and sometimes justice is the only ending that matters.